Okay, so here's my agenda. I've got 4 things I want to cover today. As I said, I want to just give a summary of AI use in thought leadership. So we're going to draw from our most recent thought leadership survey, and I'll share some findings. We'll talk about how the best firms are using AI, and I'll define what I mean by best firms, obviously, when we get to that point. And then also we're going to just spend some time talking about how you might want to go about developing a point of view on AI for your firm. And then we'll have closing thoughts and Q&A. So let you know where we're headed. All right, so in February of this year, we did a survey on thought leadership. Many of you know who have followed us over the years. We've done a lot of research around thought leadership over the last 10 years. A lot of that research I've done in partnership with a good friend of mine by the name of Bob Bidet at Bidet Thought Leadership Partners. This particular study I did solo. I did not do it in collaboration. It was done, but it did draft a lot of like sort of the learnings of those past studies. So what we did is it was a 25 question survey that covered a lot of different domains around thought leadership, and then there was a 6 or 7 questions focused specifically on AI. And what we're covering today is just the AI portion of this. So I'll do a session later in the spring that looks at the broader study and other things that we learned from that study. But it follows many of the things that some of you have seen in the past about our work around trying to understand best practices in thought leadership and how firms apply them. So this particular study fielded between mid-December and mid-February. So we sort of beta launched it in mid-December with our subscriber lists, and then in mid-February we took it to a research partner and took it deeper. So 233 firms responded, and you can see pretty good mix of different professional services firm types, about a quarter in the AE space, 30%-ish in the technology and SaaS space, and then 36% in the consulting and IT services space. We cut across a whole bunch of different functions, so we didn't limit this just to marketing or thought leadership professionals. We wanted to understand how firms are thinking about thought leadership across a much broader set of domains. So we brought in sales and BD folks, practice line managers, CEOs, and the like. So I think it gives us a pretty good distribution of what's really going on. Cut across all firmographics, it's really almost all North American firms. So while we do have some respondents from EU and Asia, the vast majority are in North America. And you can see revenue bands pretty mixed. So we have, a mix of small firms to mid-sized firms and enterprise firms, both in revenue and employee scale. So good distribution of firms across both firm types, revenue bands, and roles. And the big takeaway here, I'll tell you, is that just first and foremost, it's just the vast majority of firms are using AI in their thought leadership development efforts somehow. In fact, 90% of respondents told us that they're using it in some way, shape, or form. Now, we went underneath that, and I'll share more about what we found when we went underneath that. And then we also found that sort of the best of the best are using it more. So the leaders in thought leadership, I always have hated that phrase, but the firms that sort of do thought leadership the best, 95% of them are using AI, and we'll see later how they're using it. And then I took a slice of the top quartile of the fastest growing firms. So out of the data set, we asked everyone to tell us what their 2023 revenue growth was relative to 2022. And what we found was that every single firm that's in that top quartile, so the top quartile of growth, we're using AI. So I am not implying causation. I'm not implying that you should be using AI if you want to grow or be great at thought leadership. I'm just telling you there's a correlation here, and it's not necessarily a huge one, but it's sort of somewhat meaningful. And they're finding it useful. I mean, I think this is actually probably what I found most interesting, was that the vast majority of firms are saying it's at least somewhat useful in their thought leadership process. So if you add that up, it's 84% of firms. So that's a significant majority that are saying, hey, this is actually really useful to us. And I think it's also interesting that that percentage, we asked them to forecast future, like, when they think ahead 3 years, they think about where the technology is and where it's likely headed. Do they feel like it's going to be more useful or less useful? And you see the extremely useful, kind of like that 5 layer, that's sort of unchanged. But it's the folks that are sort of maybe skeptical that are coming up to that very useful bucket. So it's a 12% gap there, right? So I think in general, people are very optimistic that this technology can be very helpful for them in thought leadership, either now or in the future. What are they using? So I think this is the question I'm sure a lot of you want to know is like, what are people using? Because there's just so much out there and it's hard to keep track of it all. And in full disclosure, in doing this, I gave them a pick list of systems to choose from. And this was basically in our podcast, Jeff and I made a list of AI, marketing oriented AI tools about 3 months ago and started using them as litmus tests as we started to talk to firms about AI and how they're using it through our podcast series. And so this is all really like pure play AI tools. So it's not necessarily, I didn't include things like Microsoft Copilot or things that might be embedded into existing enterprise tools, which is probably a mistake in hindsight. But at the time, we were really interested in sort of adoption of existing AI tools. And you can see, far and away, ChatGPT is the most used tool in the marketplace. And I was talking to Jeff about this just yesterday. We were recording our podcast session about this data, and one of the things he asked me was why. And to me, I think it's actually fairly simple. I think there's sort of three things. I think the first thing is just brand awareness. I think that they have just controlled the narrative on AI for the last 15 months. I think most people in the world don't even recognize that generative AI is different than other forms of AI, and they just think of ChatGPT equals AI. So I think they've just sort of owned this narrative very much. And then they have a freemium option, which I think is big. Some of these systems don't. I mean, obviously Bing, Bard, Gemini, those things do, but some things don't. And then the last thing I would say is familiarity and user experience. The chat functionality is probably the most elegant there of some of the different tools I've tried. And the best example I can give there, for any of you who have tested the image generators of DALL-E versus Midjourney, the interface for DALL-E is much easier to use, although I would argue that because Midjourney actually drafts the Discord chat function, which is used mainly by gamers, that functionality is a little clunkier, but the output's better. So long-winded way of saying, I think this quote from David DeWolf, who's the CEO of Knownwell, which we'll talk more about them later, is a really valuable one. They've found that almost all AI implementations are occurring at what they call the execution altitude of the business, which is essentially personal productivity projects. People playing around with this stuff to see what it does. It's not operationalized or strategic in nature quite yet. And so this data to me reinforces that, because ChatGPT is really, really effective at that execution level, right? It's sort of in when you want to take this thing up into your strategy function or up into your operations, where maybe you start to look at some of these other technologies. So, all right, let's charge ahead here. So that's what people are using. So, and some of these you probably don't know. It's a mix. These are a mix of mainly language generators. So ChatGPT, Writer.com, Jasper largely, image generators, Midjourney, DALL-E, voice generators, Speechify, presentation generators. I believe that's what Tome does. So it's just a whole wide range of things. All right, so how are the best firms using AI? So the first thing I need to do is explain how we actually determine the best. So having done this type of thought leadership research many times over the last decade, something that Bob Bidet and I centered in on in the last study we did in 2022 was this notion of 8 dimensions of thought leadership effectiveness. So kind of a huge shout out and a thanks to Bob, because obviously a lot of the thinking that we have on thought leadership, we've drawn from our collaboration with him over the years, and also from his great book, if you haven't picked it up, Competing on Thought Leadership. So 8 dimensions of thought leadership effectiveness, and essentially we ask people to rate their firm on a scale of 1 to 5 based on how effective they are in these 8 domains. The first one is their ability to determine which issues to focus on. The second one is creating content from original primary research, so their ability to do that effectively. The third one is their ability to shape arguments from their subject matter experts and turn them into high quality content. The fourth one is their overall marketing prowess, their ability to get thought leadership into the market to generate interest and leads, so to create conversations around their thinking. The fifth is their sales prowess, so their ability to use their business development folks to really take thought leadership into client conversations or prospect conversations. The sixth is service enhancement. It's their ability to use thought leadership to create new methodologies to enhance existing services to make their services more effective. The seventh is new service creation, so invention of new products and services using the thought leadership they generate. And the eighth is just sort of having a conducive culture to thought leadership. So an organization where thought leadership thrives and is valued and people are rewarded for thought leadership. So in this study, what I did is we asked the respondents to rate their firm on a scale of 1 to 5, from not at all effective to extremely effective on all 8 dimensions. And then we took the top quartile of firms based on a summation of all of those. So maximum score would be 40, and the top quartile represented firms with a score between 36 and 40. So now, one question I know you're all going to ask is, people ask me this every time we've done these studies. They say, well, Jason, you're asking people to self-select and say that they're good at something. And how do you know they're really good at something? Well, first off, I think I've found over the years that most everybody knows when they're good at something and when they're not very good at something, both as individuals and as organizations. But second, we always do have questions related to outcomes and performance to gauge whether or not there's a corollary between the two. And there was a corollary here. We did ask growth questions, as I mentioned before, and the mean growth rate on these leaders was 19%, while the mean growth rate for the entire data set was 15%. So I'm comfortable in saying that these firms are good at thought leadership because they have demonstrated that they're growing faster than their peers. 4 points. So, okay. That's a lot. Man, thanks for sitting through that. But so now the question is, okay, what are the leaders doing differently? And how are they approaching AI relative to their peers? So we know these firms, or we believe these firms, are quite good at developing high quality thought leadership and using it to do all kinds of things very well. So let's talk about what they're doing with AI. So the first thing that's interesting is that leaders they're finding AI to be much more useful. So in fact, twice as useful. So you can see this is the data of leaders are in bright green, and all firms are in kind of the darker greenish, I don't know, gray. My color vision's not always the best. So, but they're finding it extremely useful. So they are much heavier users of the technology. We'll look here in the next few slides that the leaders are much more likely to be frequent or always users for all kinds of activities within the thought leadership development process. So I think that it's a function of the two, right? Something's more useful because you're using it more and you're getting to learn how to use it better. So they've embraced it more aggressively. They're going after it much more quickly. And as a result, they feel like it's much more useful to them. All right. Now let's look at what they did. So what we did here is, well, let me step back. So what we did is we identified 10 different tasks within the thought leadership development process, and we asked firms to tell us how frequently they're using AI to support one of those tasks. And what you can see again here in orange are all firms. So all firms say, of all the firms surveyed, 52% say they're using AI and the upstream capacity to identify new topics. By comparison, our leaders are using it 81% of the time. Now, that percentage, I need to clarify what that means. That means they answered 4 or 5, frequently or always. So these are the firms that are frequently or always using AI to identify new topics, or frequently or always using AI to develop a preliminary outline. So the key takeaway here, and I've circled it for me, is that my belief is that the leaders are more likely to use AI in sort of the very early upstream stages of thought leadership development. To identify topics is the one place they use it the most, and it's where there's also the biggest gap. Developing outlines, secondary research, so stuff that is used to inform the thought leadership development process, but not replace it. So it's sort of like AI as a co-pilot, as we've heard so many times in this kind of conversation about AI over the last 12 months. Why is that? So why would that be the case? And I'll offer my opinion. So the way we've used it, or the way we've had success using it, is definitely at that preliminary outline stage. And what I love about AI as it relates to that is when you stop and think about what generative AI really is, most of these systems are built on large language models. What is a large language model? It is a prediction machine. It predicts what word is going to come next based on its collective analysis of all the words it's ever consumed. So what it's doing when you use it to create an outline on a topic is it is giving you conventional wisdom on that topic. So basically, it builds an outline for you that tells you sort of what the collective world might say about that topic. And so now you've got this great working outline that represents conventional wisdom. It gives you the zig is what I came up with today. It's like it gives you the zig, and it's up to you and your subject matter experts and your human editors to create the zag. Now you know conventional wisdom. Now you have to look at how you break conventional wisdom. So that's why I think that's actually one of the best use cases for this technology, and why you see leaders over-indexing in the early stages of thought leadership development. All right, so then downstream, how are they using it? So first and foremost, the leaders are using it to edit a final article draft, right? So it's not about it's not necessarily about developing the content itself. You saw in the prior slide that I had that data point in there, that using it to develop the whole piece of content. It's more using the human editor and the subject matter expert in collaboration to work through that thought leadership development process, developing an outline, writing a draft, and then using it downstream to perform some tasks that are maybe cumbersome or slow, right? Editing a final article draft. So it's like all those little details, getting the final details worked out at a granular level that sometimes either gets lost in the void or just takes a lot of time. To generate audio, I like this one a lot. So we've tested Speechify a fair amount, and it's actually pretty good. You can give it an article and have it give you a pretty human, natural read. And so you can actually essentially expand the remit, right? You can say, well, we've got this article-based content, and now we have a fairly easy way to get audio content off of that. And if you think about even just the experience you have with the Wall Street Journal, whenever you read an article, there's always the option to listen to that article. And the existing tools that they're using for that are awful. It's a terrible listening experience. Nobody wants to listen to that. So and Speechify is quite good. So essentially, you can have a chance to take that up a level. And then the third is just to expand the reach. So you can see, you think about metadata and social promotion, great ways to augment, to take a finished content asset, generate the metadata, generate the social promotion aspects, the stuff that just takes time. You can essentially accelerate that. So I'll give a couple examples here. So I've been talking to a lot of firms about this and what they're doing, and I can tell you what we're doing. But one firm I talked to, I would call it a tier 1 strategy firm, editorial leader there, and what they're doing. And he just told me a story where he said, well, one of the things that they've done is they've taken a podcast interview or even a webinar like this, a recording. They have a recorded audio set, and they transcribe that using Rev, and now they have 8,000 to 10,000 words of content. Then they put that into an AI tool like a Jasper to take that down from 8,000 words to maybe 2,000 words, and then they hand it off to a human editor to then work with it and massage it more and bring it down to a publishable draft, right? So now you have a process that you're probably already doing manually, or maybe you're frequently doing, that takes a couple of weeks, and maybe you've collapsed it to a day, right? So now the funny thing is, I was talking to someone else about this process, well, with Jeff about this process, and one of the things that we explored was this idea that, all that said, you can't deliver a talk like this unless you have a clear point of view on something, right? So really, you're kind of going in a full loop. You probably worked as a human with humans to develop a clear point of view. You crystallize that, turn it into a conversation you want to have, and then you're deconstructing it again. So did you save anything? I don't know. Philosophical conversation for the day. And then the thing, what Rattleback's doing a lot of, especially internally, is that metadata work and that social promotion work. So we've got a final article draft. We might use it to generate alternative headlines, subject lines for email body copy. You can, if you don't know this, in a lot of these tools, you can upload your entire body of email content that you've published over the years, put it in there, and it can then generate emails based on your style, your voice, your tone, right? So things you can do. Okay, we're going to transition gears here and talk about developing a point of view on AI. So the first half of this talk has been all about how you can use AI to support your thought leadership development process. But I think one of the mandates many of your firms are going to face is the need to have a distinct point of view on AI for your domain of expertise. What it is you do, what the problems you solve for clients. You have to build a point of view on this in the next 12 months because it's probably the most pervasive business conversation happening right now, number one, and it's actually one of the fastest growing segments of consulting and IT services, right? As clients looking for guidance on what they should be doing from an AI perspective. So if you don't have a point of view on this, you're going to need to get one very soon, I firmly believe, across pretty much all dimensions of professional services. So there's some real challenges here, and you see them some today. I think there's really three big challenges as it relates to developing thought leadership on AI. The first thing is that typical leaders and laggard studies don't work very well. You can even see from the research that I'm sharing today, one of the challenges is AI is not being deployed that much at the operations or strategy altitudes of the business, as we heard from the folks at Knownwell. So everything's happening at execution altitude, which means that there's not a lot of best practices to be found, or they're really hard to find. So traditional surveys like the one I've just shared with you, to me, they function less like insights and more like clues to insights. So a lot of what we saw in the research that we've done to date on this is it's giving us inklings of how to think about this from a thought leadership perspective, but it's not necessarily giving us the answers that we've come to expect from a robust research study. And that's largely just because the technology is moving so quickly, new AI systems are popping up left and right, and new implementations of AI systems are popping up left and right. So it's just moving so quickly, it's very hard to research. So as I see it, I've come up with three different ways you can go about this, and I'm going to share them here along with some examples. So I think there's a number of different ways that you can overcome these challenges right now and develop a clear point of view on AI for your firm and the expertise that you have to bear. All right, so the first is to launch a pilot program, and I'm giving two examples here. At the left is an article that was featured in the Wall Street Journal about BCG's work in this area. And what they did, which I thought was interesting, was, and they're very specific about this, they say, we did not conduct a survey, we did an experiment. So in this case, they're interviewing the senior partner, Francois Candelon. I don't know if I said that right. And they did an experiment in partnership with Harvard Business School, Wharton, and MIT. And essentially what the goal was to learn when to use AI and when not, the impact on the workforce, and how it will redefine workflows and collaboration. And they took 750 of their staff and they had them work for 4 real client tasks. And they had them do it. They did what you would do in a scientific experiment, right? They had control groups that did not use AI. They had groups that used AI in different use cases. And there were things like product innovation, how to pitch those products for funding, and how to build a social media campaign. So it was very, very practical operational things. And then they discovered what they learned, right? So they went through this experiment with 750 staffers, and they started to share out their learnings of what they found, right? So, and then right, you have, this will be a podcast interview we have coming up. Sixth Sense, which some of you are probably familiar with, really hot ABM tool right now. I feel like it comes up in every client conversation I have, is they have a tool called Revenue AI, which is basically, it looks for buying signals in the digital landscape and then reports them back to you. So if you have prospects that you're working as a firm, it helps you identify where they are in the buying journey based on their interactions beyond your digital footprint, right? So it's a company that's 6 years old, I think, and it was sort of launched as an AI native company because the technology, the problem they were solving for, and the technology they were using was entirely AI based. And anyway, we're having the CIO come on to talk about this, what they called the automation domination, which was a pilot program they did last year, as a matter of fact, where they were just looking to drive efficiency across the enterprise, across the company as it relates to using AI to get more efficient. And they basically saved over 90,000 people hours of time. So we're going to cover this in depth in a future podcast episode. So I'm not going to do it here because they're going to come on live. But, a good example of, we're going to deploy this inside of our own 4 walls. We're going to see what happens, and then we're going to report out what we find. And that becomes sort of our central point of view on what you could be doing with AI. The second approach I see is just to draw from your purpose and your master point of view. I'm not going to go into detail here. This is a client of ours, Jump Associates, Silicon Valley-based strategy firm. Dave Patnaik, the CEO, just wonderfully talented, smart guy. They have a really interesting point of view on the world that anchors around this concept of future-focused strategy, which is the idea of looking at a longer-term time horizon as it relates to strategy development. And what you see it right at just a high level is just a really straightforward opinion piece that they've authored earlier this year that looks at how to think about AI and on the lens of different time horizons. So again, what they're really doing is they're just drafting their master point of view, saying this is our master point of view on the marketplace. Here's this new technology. How does it apply to that master point of view, right? So the way you would do this for any firm would be to work with your subject matter experts, make sure they're up to speed on the technology and what it can and can't do, and then just think about how it folds into your existing worldview. And then you think about how that AI can be deployed to augment the solutions you're already bringing to bear for clients. So a little more straightforward, a little bit more like just kind of working any typical business problem, but using the layer of the point of view that you already have on the marketplace. And the third is what I call just in-depth exploratory qualitative research. And that's what we've been doing for the last 6 months. So we've been running a podcast series on Rattle and Pedal, just exploring artificial intelligence. And the whole idea is just to have a series of open-ended exploratory conversations. We use each guest to give it to generate the next guest. And the whole idea is not to go in with any preconceived notions on what we're trying to learn. We're just trying to learn all aspects of AI. And you can see things we've covered in there. We've heard from Tercera. They talked to us about research they did on IT services firms and how they're using AI. We talked to KnownWell, which is a really cool emerging company with a client intelligence platform that uses AI to identify risks of client loss. And we talked with them about the promise of AI and AI readiness. This is an interview I did with a guy named Greg Bogus, super interesting guy that actually got laid off by Trello, I believe it was. He's a developer, and he just spent a year just coding stuff, just building stuff with AI. And he talked about that experience and that journey and what he learned along the way. And we did real-time demos of different use cases and different tools that he's worked with. We're interviewing 6 Sense. The whole idea is just to build a working knowledge of the topic and just go into interesting conversations on scale. In our case, we're doing it through a podcast, so we're publishing it as we go, but you don't have to do it that way. In fact, that client intelligence tool that KnownWell is building basically just came out of a series of conversations with professional services firms, not necessarily published on their podcast, just open conversations between David DeWolf, the CEO, and professional services firms to understand what their biggest challenges were, and then just ask the very simple question of, okay, if the biggest challenge right now for a lot of firms is client attrition, how do you apply AI to solve that, right? So it's just a classic marketing case study in a way, right? Okay, moving faster than I thought. So closing thoughts, there's a couple things here. I'm going to do a session recap, and then I'm going to give you some action items, and then we'll take questions. So, okay, so closing thoughts, session recap. So first and foremost, every firm is using AI at least a bit. In fact, I think that the gap between 90% and 100% is largely just because the person surveyed didn't realize what was going on, right? They weren't aware necessarily of AI use at the edge of the firm. The best firms are using it more voraciously. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, is that if you want to be great at thought leadership, we've heard this refrain 1,000 times now, it's getting really old. AI is not going to take your job. People that use AI are going to take your job, right? That's sort of the refrain. And I can't stand it because it's gotten so old, but it's really the truth here, that you're just going to have to dive into this technology and make it a big part of what you do. And ideally, as a firm, do it at the operational altitude. So test it at the execution level, figure out different use cases and different things you could do, but then take that up a notch and then build operational structure around it. Best use cases in thought leadership, to me, are early and late in the process. So that idea of developing initial outlines, surfacing topics to go after, especially topics at the edge that you may not be thinking about, and then using it late on the downstream activities and really maximizing that human interaction in the middle for shaping the argument, for telling the story, figuring out how to bring it to life. I think that's really where the great value is of human intelligence, right? Building a point of view on AI is hard because their best practices are really not there yet. They're still kind of emerging, and the technology is changing really fast. But you need a point of view, and you need one pretty soon in most firms. There's 3 ways to do that. One is to launch pilot projects. So projects you can learn from directly and then redeploy as a point of view to your clients. To draft your purpose and master point of view, really get clear on your point of view on the world, your worldview as a firm, and then look at how AI dovetails with that. Doesn't replace it, dovetails with that. And then the third is qualitative research. So qualitative discovery, open-ended, to really understand what's going on inside your client base and inside your prospect base, and use that then to synthesize a point of view on how AI is going to play out over the next 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, whatever time horizon you choose. My suggested action items. So item number 1 is, I think about it the other way around. I mean, the topic of this webinar was how to build a point of view on AI, right? But that's sort of the wrong way to look at it. It's like, so rather than focusing on AI and what it can do, think about the steps in your thought leadership development process where you struggle the most, or where you face the most pinch points or the most friction, and then use a test and learn approach to apply AI at those pinch points and see what happens, and learn along the way, and then get better and better at it. And then do the same thing for your clients. Don't focus on the AI, focus on the sticky problems. What are the sticky problems that you help them solve now? What are the sticky problems you've been unable to solve? And think about whether or not AI could be deployed in some way to either solve those problems better or solve problems you've been unable to solve before. And I would highly recommend a sort of discovery-driven, qualitative approach to discover that, to find those things, and or some type of pilot project. And you could even consider doing pilot projects in collaboration with clients or in collaboration with other business partners. Great ways to expand the data sets, right? As we've seen in other forms of thought leadership, you look at all the great work that Matt Dixon's done, a lot of the insights that have come out of his work as it relates to the Challenger sale, more recently the Activator business development model, came out of collaborative research studies across 20-25 professional services firms, and looking at the behaviors and perceptions inside those firms as it relates to sales and business development. So collaborations are always really valuable. Okay, so we are going to shift to questions here, and feel free to type away. I'll go in there now and see what's there. This is just a, well, you can see on screen. I created that image using Midjourney. So, all right, let's look through the questions and see what we got. Thoughts about Claude 3 and ChatGPT if you can't get the advanced paid version? I actually have not spent any meaningful time with Claude, so I can't comment on it at all. I generally, the message I hear loud and clear from every AI expert, which I don't consider myself necessarily to be an AI expert. I mean, as you know, most of you know me pretty well. I'm probably a pretty sound expert on thought leadership, and so now I'm expanding that. But every AI expert I've talked to or heard from has said, just get the paid version. Like, most of the time you are better off for a whole lot of reasons. Some of them can be as simple as risk. So basically, making sure that your data is not leaking to places you don't know it's going. And the second reason often is it just opens up better things. Like, for instance, in a tool like a Jasper or a Writer, you can upload information about your brand voice so that it can learn how to write in the style of your organization, which you really can't do in a free tool. Let's see here. Not sure I understand what you mean about developing a point of view on AI and why this is so important. So that's also a great question. So I think what I ultimately mean is that whatever it is you do as a firm, whatever the problems are that you solve for your clients, I think you have to assume at this point in time that artificial intelligence is in some way going to change or disrupt that approach to that solution. It just is. And so getting out in front of it now is to say, as a firm, what's our point of view on the right way, the best way to use AI to solve the types of problems that we regularly solve or that we are in business to solve. It's just a matter of time before AI is going to impact virtually kind of everything. I mean, I just don't see any way around it. You think about even architecture and engineering firms that are on this call that are thinking to themselves, I don't really know how AI is going to impact us. Maybe it's like, well, the built environment. Well, what's the one thing that keeps coming up all the time in the last decade in that industry? It's this incredible lack of engineering resources and talent. There's never enough talent to go around to get the growth that firms actually are capable of delivering on. There's more demand than there is supply. Well, AI is going to be a great tool to augment that process, right? So figuring that out and thinking about what that looks like now, I think is still really important. So, okay, got a few more here. I'll try to catch up here. In the survey, did you encounter any thoughts, concerns about the projected energy and data limits on AI? We didn't even query that. That wasn't even on my radar. So no. Great question. And hey, great space for thought leadership, right? For firms to take a position on that and say, okay, well, here's the impact of that. Here's the impact of energy consumption from AI, and here's what we can do about it as a society or as an industry, right? So that's a great one. Let's see here. ChatGPT 4 content still sounds like it was written by a secondary school student. Do you see that changing? I can't say that I'm in and out of the technology enough to know actually how well it's progressing, but I can tell you that I think ChatGPT, it's almost like what's a good analogy here? I'm trying to think of. Maybe the best analogy I can think of would be ChatGPT is like, it's like the entry level technology to this, right? It's what introduced Gen AI to a lot of us. Gen AI was not new, it had been around for a very long time, but it introduced it to a lot of us and made us aware of it. But as you think about kind of the journey of this technology, it's probably going to fade and be replaced by more sophisticated technologies. I was in my children's school yesterday talking to the head of school about how they're planning to approach AI in education. And one of the things we were talking about was a tool that they've started using that lets you take PDFs and feed them into the tool and then build guardrails around where the AI can pull from, and it can generate new content based on what's there. So it would do, he was saying they would do things like take this textbook or take this concept in this textbook and explain it to me as if I was a fourth grader. Now do it as if I'm a sixth grader. I do it as if I'm a ninth grader, right? So I think the technology is already there. A lot of it is just making sure you give it the right tool sets. But at the end of the day, it's still, I think the calling generative AI in a way is almost ridiculous, right? Because a large language model is a prediction tool. An image generator is a prediction tool. It's predicting the next pixel. And so when it's doing that, it doesn't really know what it's doing. It's just sort of spitting out an answer. So I think on some level, it's always going to be up to the human editor, the human writer, the human thinker to kind of build on top of that. So, okay, I'll take maybe one or two more questions. We're ahead of the game here, but I think we're going to take it to wrap here. So, so if you have any more, feed them in there. Probably the biggest question I've got when I've talked this through with Jeff is just, what are the leaders doing really differently? When you look at the data in there, what is it that they're doing differently other than the tasks at hand? And the biggest takeaway I've had on that up until now, for the most part, is I just think they're leaning in better. And they're thinking more in a more nuanced way. The reason I drew out the 10 steps of thought leadership in there to query it that way was to make it clear that I don't see AI as a replacement for the human editor anytime soon. What I do see it though as is a tool to augment that human editor at various points on their journey, or that subject matter expert at various points on their journey. And in that analogy, the best analogy I can give is just straightforward design software. For those of you who have been around this marketing world for a long time. There was a time, pre-computer, when advertising and creative and design, all that stuff was largely done by hand. And desktop publishing and design software came along to make that process a whole lot simpler and a whole lot faster. That did not mark the death of all designers and the end of all design. In fact, it actually was the opposite. What you ended up seeing was an incredible expansion of design, an expansion of designers in the marketplace, and even the word design. Word design wasn't even in the business lexicon before computers. So I think you're seeing the same thing as it relates to artificial intelligence. It's almost like you look at this illustration that I created. Is Midjourney going to replace every illustrator on the planet? No, but it's going to enable illustration to happen for tasks that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I created a custom illustration in about 30 seconds for a PowerPoint slide. I never would have hired a illustrator to do that in a million years, right? Because it would have been too expensive. So I think it's just going to be the next evolution of where we are in technology and its use. But hey, there's plenty of AI experts to chime in on that. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you got a lot out of this, and we will have another session coming up in late spring looking at the broader learnings from the most recent thought leadership study. So have a great day and happy spring.